Larry, that's all wet. Here, let me get this.
Never get in the way of a lineup. Well, welcome everybody. Good evening. I'm Stan Morris, the current and outgoing president. I've got about 3 minutes to go. And so welcome. I'm glad. What a nice turnout for a miserable, tough evening. You braved the weather, the elements, and thank you very much for doing it. We have thousands of Millbrook people here. We have people from throughout the community. We have our reporter, Judith Alf from Millerton News with us. Thank you for coming over. It's nice to see you. But all right, fine. We're off on our November program, and we're just not going to waste a lot of time with talking. We have a major item to do, which refers back to the 3 minutes I was talking about. We traditionally change our officers every other year or every year, but with rotating terms. The officers normally operate, and keep me honest on this one, Diane, officers serve for 2-year terms, and then they're rotated. Right now you'll see 3 new officers come in and 1 officer remaining out of the 4. And then we have 3 sets of 4 directors, 1 set renewed every 3rd year. And I think that's about right. So, okay, fine. So that's what it's all about. And so my job as the outgoing president is to introduce the spokesperson for the selection committee for this year. Bryson Ainsley, would you come up and would you please conduct the business and put our new officers into place?
We will try. Well, we came up with a wonderful slate. President, Diane McNeil. And I'm going to ask you to stand up and wave frantically at you. Secretary, Allison Meyer. And as Vice President to fill in the rest of Diane's term, Robert McHugh. Robert. And board members, Skip Dixon. There he is. Alexander Marshall. Susan Fargione. And Diana Bonacue. And then to fill in for Allison Meyer's remaining term will be Robin Capers. Stan, do we get a vote now from members or what?
Yes, so would you conduct the vote, please? Right.
Yes, all in favor of this group, say aye.
Aye.
And against? Comments? Commentary? Done.
Done. Thank you, Bryce. That was short and sweet, right to the point. I'll tell you, I couldn't be happier with the new slate of officers and directors. It's a fine group. I've been working with it for a number of years. We have 2 new personalities that are joining us. Diana, come on in, please. This is Diana Bonacue. You're already a director, but you weren't even, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you were here. You were listening to the back row. Okay, welcome aboard.
Thank you very much.
Great. All right, fine. Very good. Now, let's get to the program. A fascinating program. I don't know why we didn't do this before. Okay, Alex is raising her hand up. What you got, Alex? Good. Yes, I'm sorry, yes.
Hi, everybody.
Yes.
I've been on board, this is the 3rd year, and I'm rotating now into a new rotation, and I sort of ended up with the official business. So then we sent out an appeal this month for annual funds to supplement our budget, and we had trouble finding out what our name was. So it turned out that the official name of this group is the Town of Washington Historical Society. It was doing sort of an AKA as the Village of Millbrook, Town of Washington Historical Society, which we all figured out we couldn't get on a check. And QuickBooks won't take it, and so it's a mess. And so what we would like for you to consider is changing the name of the 501c3 again and making it just the Millbrook Historical Society. I'm bringing it up today so that we have time before the next meeting to talk about it with each other and come up with any questions or whatever. But hopefully we can vote on it in January and go through the sort of legal process of becoming the Millbrook Historical Society. Much easier on the check. We think of Millbrook as a big umbrella over this entire area, and it goes all the way to Mashonack and almost over Plain. So, you know, we're inclusive, and we have the archives now beginning to prove that. So, any questions for me before I sit down and get on with it? Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much. Okay, fine. Yes, the name change has caused some challenges over the years, but Millbrook Historical Society is simply the best name that we've come up with. There seems to be consensus within the community, and that's the direction in which we will go. So thank you again, Alex. Okay, fine. Let's get into our program. We have at least 4 presenters tonight, working together as a team. And I have really had trouble right before the meeting identifying the ringleader or the person who has said, yes, I'm in charge. And now, I'm not sure why that is, but we don't worry about that. But I'm simply going to point to Susan Farjeon, our outgoing secretary. And would you please take over the program and tell us about the women of Millbrook?
Yes, thank you. I think Stan might have had a little trouble identifying me tonight because this program is due really to Ginny Augerson, who last year said, oh, wouldn't it be great if we did something about the women of Millbrook? And she has a family member, Lizzie Louise Birch, who she'll talk to you about later. But Robin joined Ginny and I working on Tuesdays in the archive each morning, and it's really been fun. And when we started getting down to organizing this more carefully, we realized we needed more help than we had. And Tony Ann Cena mentioned that her family put together a beautiful scrapbook for her aunt, known as Molly Masserone. And so she'll be joining us also as part of our team. So it's really been a wonderful team effort, and I hope it'll be a richer presentation for that. And what we did was we gathered images and information, and we tried to piece together stories of 3 women: Lizzie Louise Birch, Susan Denian Sackett, and Mary, known as Molly Masserone. But we're also going to talk about a few women's groups whose work especially benefited the community. And Millbrook has quite a long history, and those women's groups did some really extraordinary things that everyone should be proud of. So I hope you'll hear a little bit about it tonight and maybe read more afterwards. We decided to begin with the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which Robin is going to talk about, because it was established a year after Lizzie and Susan were born. So we thought that was the environment that they were walking into when Susan was growing up in Millbrook and when Lizzie came to Millbrook.
So we remind us our easel, so this is our makeshift easel. As we said, when we started doing the research on this project, it was more challenging than we thought because there wasn't a lot in print. There wasn't a lot in the archives. So we went one day to the library and we got some of the old Millbrook Roundtable, the 1919, 1920, and 1921. And we really thought we'd get a lot of good gossip and good stories out of it. We really didn't, but we found it was much more worldly than we thought the paper was at the time. It talked about Europe, it talked about all over the country, and we didn't get what we really wanted. But there was, they did the local whose baby was born and who went to Poughkeepsie and that kind of stuff. But my favorite was that most of the things were about the Benham family. Where they went, who they saw, what they did. Well, Ginny explained that to me. That is because one of the daughters, she wrote the column. So she knew what they did, and she didn't know what anybody else did, so she just wrote about the Benhams. So we'll begin with the WCTU, and that's the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which was organized in Millbrook in 1878. The first president was Rhoda Swift, and she kept that till her death in 1932. They must have really had a large group of people because they built their own building in 1882, which is this building here, which you all know is J. McLaughlin's. Now, it was the only public hall, and it held events till the Memorial Hall was built in 1894. The women of WCTU began our first library as we know it today. They would hold lectures and other social events at WCTU, but the admittance to these events were a book. So you had to bring a book in to get into the events. There were other people that also did, help the private donors help the cause. But in 1904, Samuel Thorne persuaded the ladies to donate the books to create the Millbrook Free Library. 1894, sorry. And they were housed in the Memorial School till the library was incorporated under state laws. The cost of membership was $1 a year. One of the other important works of the WCTU was the scientific temperance instruction of the effects of alcohol and narcotics on the human body that was taught in public schools. These women were devoted to social reform, such as the suffrage and health issues, besides prohibition. And also many of the members were also part of the visiting nurse service and the Red Cross. On December 1904, the WCTU filed a formal complaint against the village. And it was that beer was being sold out of the back of trucks, and they were horrified. WCTU was sold in 1917, just before Prohibition. The 18th Amendment was ratified on January 16, 1919. They still met, but they met in churches, and they're still an organization today. I went online to check. And they still believe in temperance, in alcohol, in narcotics. And I don't know how many members I have. The one interesting thing is you'll see the pictures here of the building. We don't have it when it was the WCTU. We only have it when it was Kiever's store. So we're putting this out if anybody has old pictures that they maybe don't know what they are. Maybe it's the old WCTU building. So, yes.
No, but I don't want to put you on, but temperance versus abstinence?
They did both. The abstinence was for things that were bad for you, health-wise. So like too much candy, too much bacon, it was abstinence. It was to do just what would be good for you. And then of course, the alcohol part, you couldn't have any alcohol.
So the word temperance means no alcohol.
Yeah, no alcohol whatsoever. And it says it in their rules today, no alcohol whatsoever. And moderation in everything else. So.
But they were just as active with child welfare causes and equality for women and vote for women. And they were also very concerned about the poor people and wanting to better their lot as well. So it wasn't just that they were involved with prohibition, although that is what they are known for. But that underlying thing about the rest of the community is something that the visiting nurse service also picked up.
And on to Lizzie.
Yeah, so the environment that the Women's Christian Temperance Union is set up is one that Lizzie really walked through.
I have a question. In the temperance, and the WCTU, were they of different religious backgrounds?
Yes.
Were they truly a democratic organization?
A suggestion? Would you please put the poster on the table? It's a lot more visible up there. If you don't mind.
We also even found out that after Samuel Thorne convinced them to give their books to the Millbrook Memorial School, the new young principal there decided that he wanted to create a program of higher education and that he wanted that program to take place in the WCTU hall. which is really quite extraordinary. This was a very robust program they had, and everybody seemed to support it until I think they needed to dismantle it around wartime, when women were asked to put their own interests aside for the greater good of the nation. So Jimmy will now talk about that.
I'm sorry, one more question. During Prohibition, was there any bootlegging happening in this area?
I'm sure there was. That's another talk, probably.
Susie.
One of my brother's high school friends, was definitely a bootlegger, was well known. And the town leaders used to go to his home in the evening to have cocktails. So it was well known and taken advantage of by some. Lizzie Louise Birch was my great aunt. She and my uncle Bert raised my mother from maybe the age of 13 on, when my mother's mother had died, and my mother came to live with her. So she ended up being like a grandmother to us. And I will read a little bit about her. Who was Lizzie Birch? Well, she was Albert Birch's wife. But she was more than that. She was born in 1877 in Canajoharie, New York, and was adopted by William and Henrietta Adelman. She graduated from Cornell University's Art College in 1899 with a bachelor's degree in German. And I still have her little Cornell which I'm amazed survived. She didn't give it to me, it came to the family after her death, but she did encourage me to go to Cornell, and I did go to Cornell. And I saw where she lived, which would have been in Ithaca. And up above Ithaca, up the hill, was the Cornell campus. And I can imagine that she boarded in someone's home down in Ithaca and had to make either the long hike up to the campus in the cold weather, or if she was lucky, there were trolleys running then. I'm not sure. But 4 years going there, I'm sure she had a lot of exercise. It was a big campus. Sometime after 1900, Lizzie came to Millbrook to teach German, and here she met Albert Birch. He was one of 12 brothers, 3 of whom operated department stores in Dutchess and Columbia County. And his store was opposite the bank on Franklin Avenue, and is still sort of a department store when I think of it. Lizzie spent the day at the store, keeping the account books at her desk on a raised section where she could have a good view over the floor. She also made the buying trips to New York City. As her niece, I visited for a week every summer and loved spending time in that store. I would sit up next to my Aunt Lizzie and feel like a big deal being up there in that raised section, or just go around the store and talk to people. And they had a house, the house they built was and still is on Maple Avenue, and was built in arts and crafts style. It was very, I used to visit every summer for a week, and the inside was just very intriguing. The staircases were different, everything was fun. The little cubby holes that were here and there made it a fun place to be. They had a sleeping porch there in the front of the house where they slept in the fresh air. There was always a large flower and vegetable garden overseen by Lizzie down in the back of the property. They welcomed their niece Mildred, my mother, Mildred Birch, who came to live with them at the age of 13 when her mother died. Mildred later married Stanley Benham, the son of the village mayor. Lizzie was a fine role model for me and my sister. Besides being active in the store, she was active in the community, often holding meetings at the house. She was a secretary for the community project around 1913, that I never did get the name of. They had given it.
Survey in the town of Washington, which some people know as the Lyle Survey, is very important.
Thank you. And that survey investigated conditions in the village, and I believe tried to improve those conditions.
Yes, I think a lot of people think that the situation for the people living in Hogan's Alley was improved due to that survey.
retirement plans to travel the world were dropped when her husband Albert died suddenly in 1946. Lizzie lived on in the big house, and all of our nieces and nephews certainly enjoyed chances to visit and live there and be able to walk down to Millbrook to the stores when we got old enough to do it by ourselves. I just have very fond memories of it all. Thank you.
Now, we have to say a few more things about Lizzie than Ginny mentioned, because she really was extraordinary. She spoke about the welfare of children in Dutchess County, and particularly what Millbrook was doing, because Millbrook was doing something that no place else was doing. Millbrook decided that children would be better off, even if there were difficulties in the home, to stay with their families intact. And that was costing more money, so the people in charge of these programs were kind of after the community, why are you over budget? And Lizzie, as wife of the mayor at the time, was the one who stood up and spoke out and advocated for what we were doing, and the program continued. And I think today people would agree that that's one of the best ways to handle those situations when possible. She also, in 1917, was called by a woman who had responsibility to do a military census for all of Dutchess County. Lizzie was the one who was doing the census in the town of Washington and Burbank. And it was an extraordinary time because it was the first time that women were ever in the census. And that was because things had changed sufficiently that the government officials now realized that women were property owners, and that if things were difficult and they needed equipment or livestock or land, they needed to know who to turn to, whether it was a woman or a man. And that was very, very unusual. We found also a nice clipping that the people who did that census in Westchester were all members of the suffragist movement. So we think that Lizzie might have been. We know that one member of the family was, but we couldn't find any clear evidence about Lizzie. And that's been a problem with a lot of what we do, because the record for women gets lost often because their married names are different than their maiden names. And also I think women just did these things because it needed to be done in the community. Something had to be done for the poor, something had to be done for the children, and they just did it. And as Robin said, we're looking for the records of the WTCU because we just can't find those. So somebody's got them in their attic. So don't throw anything out. And even if you have a photograph or a document, what we learned was that sometimes in our work we would find one picture that meant nothing to anybody, but when we were piecing together our work, it made a lot of things make sense. So even if you have one document or one picture, it could still be very valuable to people doing some kind of work. So don't undervalue what you have. And there are always people in the archive on Mondays and Tuesdays, and you can come those mornings or call Kathy Derringer and she'll make an appointment and take a look at whatever it is you have. So Lizzie also was a observer for the military. She had this identity card for aircraft warning system of the service of the U.S. Army. It's kind of a fierce picture, but this is later in her life, and I think this was something she was very proud of. And like other citizens in Millbrook, they would meet up, I think at the top of the tribute garden, up where the St. Joseph's School is, and they would try to identify whatever planes were coming overhead, and also educate other people about what these planes look like. Millbrook School, the prep school had a similar program, and people made model airplanes, and it was really a point of pride in the community. She was also a member of the St. Cecilia Society. She was vice president of that, and a member of the Garden Club. The Millbrook Garden Club was and is a branch of, Fanny, you might correct me if I'm wrong here, but what we saw was that it is a branch of the American Garden Club, which was founded by Mrs. Helen Stafford Thorne. And it's really quite something. Is that still the case? Okay.
Can I ask you a question? The author, Vladimir Nabokov, was an avid gardener, and I believe he was a member of that garden club. You don't know?
I don't know.
The Garden Club of America was huge. They traveled everywhere and they went to other countries to look at gardens, and we're hoping that next year members of the society will help research a program so we can talk more about Helen Stafford Thorne and her work in that group, because it's really quite extraordinary.
Do you know what the St. Cecilia Society did?
You know, I'm sorry, I don't.
St. Cecilia was the saint of music.
We saw it, and I think we've been reorganizing things in the archive, and I think it might have gotten whisked off for some work that they were doing at St. Joe's, but I really don't even know if that's a St. Joseph's group or a Grace Church group or Lyle or where it could be. But she was vice president of that, so music was also very
I think it
important.
must be much bigger. I have a painting of St. Cecilia's hands.
Well, St. Cecilia goes way back.
Way back.
Yeah, she's always been there, but the Millbrook St. Cecilia Society, I don't know if anybody here has any knowledge of it. Well, we'll try to work on that for another time. What else was she involved in? Well, she also was a member of the visiting nurse, the Millbrook Visiting Nurse Committee. And that was something that was, our earliest information on that was in 1928. And what we found in this little booklet, which we've made a photocopy of, was that they had determined in 1927 that the community had a child mortality problem. And then they reported in 1928 that they had addressed it and that they were receiving accolades for having improved things beyond that of any other community in the county. So I thought that was really, again, quite extraordinary. And it consistently was comprised of about 15 different women and one visiting nurse. In the later days, in the 40s, there were 6 doctors advising them, and there were 2 visiting nurses and a dental hygienist, which is pretty unusual. But Susan Denyon Sackett is who I'm supposed to talk about, and she was a contemporary of Lizzie's. They were both born in 1877. Susan, though, was a native of the town of Washington.
Question for everyone.
Yeah.
Did Lizzie die in her own house?
Ginny, did Lizzie die in this beautiful house?
I think she probably died at home. She was a Christian Scientist, it wouldn't have been in the hospital. I was away, married, way someplace when she did die.
So she spent her adult life right there.
Yes,
That's fantastic.
There's a Christian Science church in Poughkeepsie. Was she a member of that?
yes, she would have been.
And who's the photograph up here? Is this,
Ginny, this is, this is Northbrook?
That is on my father's side, that's
Sally Northbrook.
Sally Norfolk would have been a great aunt, I think.
and the woman to the
That's a sort of a portrait of her. We wanted to include those because we thought they were striking and it showed you how women dressed at a certain time. And we love this one too because Ginny said she felt it represented when women began to go out on their own. Because for a long time we didn't venture anywhere without a gentleman. So it was, to think of that as a turning point is really quite extraordinary. So Susan was a native here, and she graduated from the Hearts Village School in 1844 at the age of 17. 1894, the same year that the Millbrook Memorial School was erected. Like some of the women we've researched, documentation is sketchy, but we do know that she taught in Lithgow, and we think she may have also taught at the Burbank one-room schoolhouse, because there's a nice article in the Round Table about a magic lantern presentation she gave, which was well attended and which everyone enjoyed. It was about birds. So we think that since it was given in the Burbank school, that perhaps she taught there as well.
Two room.
Two-room, oh, that was a big school. Thank you, Skip. So you see how we rely on everyone to keep us honest, because when you're doing this, there are all kind of pieces, little pieces of information, and sometimes what you've read in the book isn't even accurate.
Yeah, often. So Burbank, where was it in Burbank?
It's on the northwest corner of 82 and Burbank Village Road. Red building now.
But the school that she is known for teaching in is the Mavisville School, and that's District 2, and that was formerly part of the Wodell Farm. And this is, I think it's this building on the top there. And someone, Dick Heydrich, made a nice floor plan, if anybody wants to look at it later. She taught there for 35 years. And she was so, when she took the job, all the newspapers were saying that her splendid record as a teacher was recognized by all, and they were congratulating Mavisville on having won her. It was really something special. And she, I think, loved the work as well, because she stayed there for 35 years. She was going to retire in 1944, but she extended it a year, and I have a feeling that they really begged her, because there was a big newspaper article about that. She was a tough taskmaster, but she did have a sense of humor, and she had storytelling, and the kids seemed to like that a lot. She also taught a lot of children how to knit, because that was part of the war effort to make these little knitted squares so that Afghans could be made and sent with the Red Cross. She was married, we don't know when, but sometime before she took the job, she married a gentleman named George Sackett. We don't know anything about him except that he died in 1945, but Ginny the other day pulled this out, and it's a picture of Mary and Sarah Sackett, who had a private school in Bengal.
India?
Bengal Road. And we don't, maybe I'm saying wrong, Bengal, excuse me. I'm not a native, but I love it. So we don't know about this, but we think the Sacketts must have been teachers, and who knows, but that's a project that we will work on, and we hope that if anybody has information, they'll send it our way. It's very intriguing. Let's see. We also heard that Susan was such a good teacher that the children of wealthy families would be sent to her instead of the school that was closer to them or a private school. She was just that well respected. And Ginny also remarked to me when we started this that she really was probably the only woman who was just a school teacher who was on all these committees and in these clubs. Everybody else was a business leader or a minister, or someone who was quite wealthy. So clearly she was honored by being brought into all these things, and she worked well with everybody that she came into contact with. Now, like the other women we've talked about tonight, she had a lot of activities she was also a part of. She was secretary for St. Joseph's Altar Society. In fact, she's buried in the St. Joseph's Cemetery. I would love to go and find that. I'm sure it's easy to find. But
So she was a Catholic?
Yes, which is interesting too. She was a member of the Washington Grange and the American Legion Auxiliary and the Millbrook Garden Club. Another person in the Garden Club was Edna Tilsley. I think some of you may remember her. Her husband was publisher of the Round Table for quite a long time. And I mention her because she also attended a one-room schoolhouse, and she was a one-room schoolhouse teacher up in Schoharie County. And this is a photograph of, we think this is Edna. This is the Millbrook branch of the Garden Club in 1940. And on the back, I didn't bring the real photograph, but on the back of the photograph is a note penned by Helen Stafford Thorne thanking Edna for her lively and wonderful assistance. And it's really just quite beautiful. And these women have, I don't understand the costume, but clearly it was a great source of pride to everybody involved. And I'm sure that this is the Thorndale, yeah, it doesn't look Dutch, but it's, I can't quite figure out why it would be Dutch. But anyway, come look at it when you have a moment. Now, Edna was in the garden club, that photograph is from 1940. So we've kind of gotten to the era when Molly Masserone came to
was one of her clients, actually, Edna Tilson.
Really? Well, so maybe this is a perfect segue, because although all these women have accomplished a lot, the group that was coming in the 30s and 40s, they accomplished a great deal too. So I'm hoping Tony Ann will come up and talk a little bit about her aunt, and maybe show you this beautiful
Susan, there's a
book.
question over there.
Oh,
Susan,
Yes, Stan.
one last thing, on Edna Tilsley, she was a founding member of this historical society in 1973. So she spent a long time in this village.
and the Millbrook Roundtable for many years had wonderful articles about her history. So hopefully we'll find a way to start doing that again. But come on up, Tony Ann.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, we're so proud to have you. It's really extraordinary because it sounds like this will be the first business maybe that has 3 generations.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Certainly
Good
first
evening.
3 generations of women.
That's right. My Aunt Mary, Molly Masserone, arrived in the United States in 1930. She was born in Fundy, Italy, a small town between Rome and Naples, in 1916. She and her brother Anthony, my father, were brought to the United States by their mother Teresa. Their father, Louis, and their grandfather awaited their arrival in America, the land of opportunity. The family first lived in Buffalo, New York, then they moved to New Jersey before finally relocating in Millbrook, arriving during the years of the Depression. Shortly after World War II, Mary, who was in her late 20s, was offered a job working at Mary Lou's beauty shop as a hairdresser. The salon was located on Franklin Avenue in Millbrook, and it was owned by Mary Lou Reeds. My aunt's decision to begin work outside of her home was a difficult one. All things considered, she decided to take the offer and began working part-time. Since there were already 2 other employees named Mary, it was then that she acquired the nickname Molly. The nickname stuck, and from then on, she was known as Molly Masserone. In the early 1960s, after 17 years in business, the owner of Mary Lou's Beauty Salon wanted to sell. Again, Molly had a tough decision to make. She loved her work and the people she worked with. She had built up her own clientele and was well-liked and respected by everyone. Molly gained the courage to speak with Leeds and later arranged with the Bank of Millbrook to not only buy the business, but the building as well. Mary Lou's Beauty Salon became Molly's Beauty Shop, and Mary Masserone was now a business owner. She was a single woman in her early 40s, a businesswoman in the early 1960s. Although she had very little formal education, Molly was hardworking and highly skilled in her profession. She single-handedly ran a successful business for 40 years. After working with me for several years, I took over the business from my aunt in 1983 and changed the name to the Fox and the Hair Salon. She continued to work for me full-time for many years. During that time, she taught me to be compassionate and respectful. Molly taught me to not only bring out the outer beauty of our clients, but the inner beauty as well. When Aunt Mary was not working at the salon, her time was spent with our family, who she loved. She especially loved living in the village and walking to and from work every day. My aunt's strong work ethic and determination helped her throughout her career as a hairstylist during a time when it was somewhat difficult for a young woman to own and operate their own business. She rarely missed a day of work and always treated her customers with tender, loving care. These are the lessons I learned from her and will now instill in my daughter, Carolyn, as she enters into this profession. She will be the 3rd generation to join the salon. I am very excited to share my passion and love of the business with my daughter as I did with my aunt. In 1996, Molly was recognized by the local business association as a successful businesswoman, and what an honor that was for her.
My aunt passed away at the age of 98 on October 28, 2014, and she will always be remembered as a hardworking, generous, and friendly woman, greatly missed by friends and family in Millbrook.
When we talked about this, we thought we would pause in between and ask if there were any questions and then take names if people want to follow up, but it's not so easy to do what you plan in these talks. So, does anybody have a question for anyone? No? Okay. Oh.
He's been
I would like to say a few words. And we are recognizing the women of Millbrook. Back in 1945, I went to work at the corner news store. I bought it in 1947 when I graduated from high school. 1950, I got the greetings. You are now in the United States Army. I was drafted for 2 years. I would lose the store, and I just, God bought it. Thank you to my sister, who sat in, and that is why I'm standing up today, to have her recognized as one of the women that kept us going. Today, believe me, when I tell you, I had the store for 54 years. I would have never in a million years ever, I would have lost the store, hadn't she taken it, and I came back and did it.
She babysat.
But anyway, thank you very much.
Thinking that Ian Helen threw the keys back to him when he came back. Is that true, Ian Helen?
That's hard running a business. Yes.
I have a kind of personal question. I'm curious about the name Birch, which was my maiden name. And I'm wondering, my father was a farmer, lived in Washington County. I was in fact born there, in a place that was called Birch Hill. And I'm just curious if there was any connection with the Washington County Birches.
I don't know, but that's worth looking into. Now, what was the time period again? I'll have to go home and do a little research.
Well, I was born in 1924, and they were living on the farm then. By then, I think my grandfather, who was Brody Benjamin Birch, had already passed away.
What was his first name?
Brody.
Brody Benjamin Birch.
Brody Benjamin.
You should probably chat with Ginny afterwards
I will.
and give her your number so she can get back in. Perhaps when we're finished, you should give Ginny your phone number so she can get back in touch with you, because she's a very good researcher. When we were working on this, we'd be stymied, and all of a sudden I'd see these folders filling up with stuff. And she was coming in, unbeknownst to Robin and I, and finding information, so she's very, very good at that.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Yeah, where was that house that's there by?
This one?
Yeah, I know it looks familiar.
This one, it's up on Maple.
Maple.
Maple, at the top of Maple.
Charlie Sills.
When you're going around the other side.
It's
Okay.
right across from Ellie and Tony Sloan.
Okay.
It's Charlie Sills' house.
It's Charlie Sills' house now?
Yeah.
And what's that one over there? The little,
This one?
yeah.
This is the fox and hare. I mean, it really was quite extraordinary for somebody to get the advice that you ought to buy your building as well, because I think that's probably the only way you could be a successful business and go on indefinitely. So Molly obviously was good at all this. It's beautiful. And I guess this is where Limone is now, is that correct?
Susan, Mrs. Sackett, you said she was educated at a school in Harts Village?
Arts Village, I don't know what the district number, but it was another one-room schoolhouse situation.
So you don't know where this was located and how big Harts Village at that time was?
I bet we have a map in the archive that would tell you that, actually. There's some maps from 1865, I think the ones on the wall might give you a good idea.
Yeah, David talked about it, he knows exactly.
Oh,
I don't remember where he.
There is a folder in the archive for each one of the 11 district schools that we had.
Yeah, I know.
So, yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
probably
Jenny developed that one.
It's amazing how much we don't know, even though we
I have a
did.
1935 road map with all the school districts, all the one-room school identified. Like Shady Dell was number 6.
Well, that sounds like a nice piece.
That should be a fairly common map.
Well, we've invited you to come give us your things before, Charlie.
We bring the coffee, I'll bring the
Yeah.
map.
Well, we're gonna have one of those meetings on Saturday, we're hoping to lure Bryce back if we have coffee. I mean, he might come without coffee and donuts, but we've offered that.
And I was in the Burbank school from 42 to 48.
Yeah, but you had a big school.
All right.
Kindergarten through 4th and one enrollment, 5 through 8. I was the first 8th grade class to come to Millbrook
Okay.
from that.
Well, I think on behalf of Robin and Tony Ann and Ginny, I think we'd like to thank you guys all for listening and being so interested in this, because we found it fascinating. And I hope that people keep finding out things like this about the village and the people that we don't usually hear about. They're really fascinating too. So, thank you all.
Well, thank you all. What a wonderful presentation. A lot of hometown touches, interaction, and things coming out of the woodwork, as it were. Very well done. Thank you. The displays are particularly impressive, and you'll leave them up here, I hope, for a little while tonight, and so on and so forth. But great. All right, fine. So we're ending a little bit earlier tonight, but thanks to Irene Wing and Fanny Mancy, we have a wonderful spread of confections and cakes and cupcakes and so on over there. Please join us right there. Is there any business that anyone would like to talk about or comments that you would like to make at this time before we adjourn to the refreshments? Yes, ma'am.
But it's
Millicent Cox.
It's totally out on the wings.
Out of the wings, yes.
There was a family named Buck, as in Pearl Buck.
Yes,
Okay, and Mr. Buck came from Dutchess County.
okay.
Has anyone heard about him? He wrote about salt box houses besides factory tools,
Clifford Buck.
machines.
What's that name?
Clifford Buck, he lived at Salt Point.
Clifford.
It must be that family then, because I have read about him and I can't find any one, it's like all over the place.
He was a big insurance agent.
That's
That
right.
must have been his father or a brother or something.
Clifford Buck.
Well, he married, one of them marries Pearl Buck, and they go to India, and she writes the famous The Good Earth. But on Woodstock Road, there's a salt box house that's not the best description of a salt box, but it falls under that architectural ease. And he wrote about that house, and I have read it, but I cannot find the book that I read it in. Anyway, it's fascinating to find what he's written. He and his wife separated, so that's another part of the trail. Anyway, anyone that knows about the Buck family.
Well, this is Jonathan Boyce, Millicent Cox. Why don't you get together over coffee and cakes and so forth? That was good. Thanks for coming up with the name. Great. Anything else, folks? Any comments in general? This is wide open for discussion. You can tie into the nice presentation or anything.
It's all right.
Okay, if not, congratulations again to Diane McNeil and her crew
Don't
for
press
next
it.
year. Thank you all for coming, and yes.
One little thing
Yes.
is, some of us are getting together in the archive, I alluded to this earlier. We're getting together in the archive at 10:30 on Saturday, because we're trying to pull together a historical house tour, theoretically for summer of 2016.
2016.
But it is something that takes a lot of planning and a lot of effort, so if anybody has interest in that, or background doing that, or a historical house and would like to join us, come. The door often is locked to the village hall on Saturdays, but we'll try to do something so that we meet upstairs for the first 15 minutes and know that everybody who wants to come has come, and then we'll go down to the archive. So that would be this Saturday, the 21st of October at 10.
November.
It's such a busy month, I don't
21st of November, 10:30 in the morning, Village Hall. Tom?
I'd like to thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Everything, Chairman of everything, and what have you.
My pleasure,
I
Tom. Thank you
think
very
you
much.
do wonderful things here.
It's been my pleasure, please. All right, fine. Any other comments before we adjourn the meeting? If not, meeting adjourned. Thank you for coming.